Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys are enjoying the show. We are in the home stretch and we are going back to the NBA in this fascinating rookie class that's so balanced and so skillful. We are going to assess their performance in the Summer League and see how they will translate in terms of fantasy. We're going to focus on some rookies who are in the Rookie of the Year discussion and some rookies who might get there at the end of the season. Without further ado, let's jump right into this segment. Now, one thing I think a lot of people look for in Summer League is not necessarily consistency, but certain traits that will allow rookies to settle into their teams. It's all about diagnosing what your starting five weaknesses are and how you're going to add these pieces into it, these new pieces into it. And so I'm going to look at these guys in terms of what they will add value-wise first, in terms of fantasy-wise second, because that's the thing that I think a lot of people take away from Summer League. Looking at these guys through a lens of fit. Let's start off with Razaka, who we talked about for our NBA Rookie of the Year segment. He is, in my humble opinion, a guy who is going to be a quote-unquote slow burn. He's not going to immediately pop off the page as a guy who you trust from the get-go. I think he's going to need time to settle into this Atlanta Hawks team, and they don't need to rush it. I know that they kind of want to now that Dejounte Murray is gone, but at the current moment in time, you still need to understand that out of everyone in this draft class, you decide to take a flyer on Razaka, and at the end of the day, this entire class is an unfinished product, and so you have to roll with the punches here. Yes, Razaka certainly can be a star immediately, but I don't think he needs to be and wants to be. That's the main thing a lot of people are talking about. Is Razaka intent on being a star in this league? And I think that the Atlanta Hawks are going to figure out by hook or by crook, because this is kind of a now more desperate pick than people expect. Now that Dejounte Murray is gone, a lot of weight is going to be placed on his shoulders, and I don't think he's as prepared. That being said, though, I think the traits that really pop off the page is length, his versatility, good shot off the dribble, makes him an intriguing fantasy option, and I think he can go in categories, leagues, maybe even ESPN leagues, especially in the top 100 to 125 picks. I think that the value he adds really stems from him being a big man kind of in the mold of Wemby, where he has traits that he can really focus on that will make him pop, and then some traits that he needs to work on. Maybe strength to add to his size will make him a player of intrigue in the future. But right now, Razaka is certainly a number one pick with a lot more questions than answers to him. Then let's go to Reed Sheppard, because that dynamic between Reed Sheppard and the Houston Rockets is going to be an interesting one, because the Houston Rockets are still a young team trying to figure out what, if any, identity they're going to have for the future of this team. Now, like I said before, the one trait that people can pinpoint in Reed Sheppard is obviously his shooting. 52% in college, can create his own looks. And I think that Reed Sheppard, when we talk about shooters especially, when Reed Sheppard comes to mind, he's going to be someone whose shooting might not detract as much as people think from what the Houston Rockets style of play is. I kind of view him as almost a second coming of Harden, in that his shooting really stretches what the Houston Rockets can do. And I think there's a lot of athleticism, raw athleticism, on the Houston Rockets that needs to be tapped into. And Reed Sheppard can kind of allow most of that Houston Rockets offense to really stand out. I like what Jalen Green does. He's a solid driver. I like Alperen Şengün as well. It's a solid kind of hybrid center forward position. And so adding shooting, yeah, might like Reed Sheppard to be something a little bit more than just a pure shooter. But, it could be effective. And so I think he might be a top 100 pick as well in fantasy because of his ability off the bench perhaps to shoot the lights out. And so Reed Sheppard is someone who you might want to consider, but might need to develop, much like Razaker, in the ways he can improve upon what he's doing already. And then, last but not least, let's look at a player who we didn't necessarily mention in terms of this summer league and this rookie class. How about Donovan Clingan? He kind of got lost in the mix. He's another one of those big guys who is going to have a lot of stats you might covet a lot in fantasy as well. He's a guy you might have to pay some attention to. He led the summer league in blocks, rebounding. So, as you can see, maybe in the center position where, points are certainly going to be at a premium outside of, unusual stats. There are only a couple few centers in the league who you can really rely upon as number one options, the Jokic's and Embiid's of the world. But in a league where big men are really transitioning into the next big thing, Donovan Clingan is kind of anomalous. Because I think that the center evolution is highly predicated on how these centers are scoring. And when I think about Donovan Clingan, he can score the bucket, for sure. But what I love about him is he's so keyed in defensively that you have to compensate for the size and strength he brings on the defensive side of the ball. That being said, the minutes are a concern. It leaves on the Portland Trail Blazers where, they have a nice little mix of centers that they want to play. But I think that Donovan Clingan is more of a categories lead guy. And the reason being is that obviously categories, especially in rebounds and blocks, are going to be very important. So if you can get those weird stats, then you might be all set in terms of that department. But Donovan Clingan is certainly in a situation where he might not be as highly coveted as other options in this system. But the overarching sentiment thinking about this rookie class is that these are unfinished products. These are guys who, at the end of the day, are going to need to grow into what these teams think about them. And it really was a weird kind of lottery draft because you had teams at the top of the lottery that are more in retooling mode than full-on rebuild. Like, take the Hawks, for example. Everyone knew that they were going to give up at least one of their players, right? But they still have Trae Young. And if they truly believe in Razaker's skill set and believe that he can add more value and upside than a Dejounte Murray, then they felt like this is the draft where they just had to pick the best value for their team image in the future. And then from there, it really just opened up the best available fit. This felt like a very kind of best available, kind of by the book approach to this draft class. And who knows? Maybe this draft class is getting a little bit underrespected, underappreciated. But that just goes to show that the league is ever changing. And it's going to be very difficult for these young players to really find a place early and often to fit into this team. That's why assessing Summer League is so difficult, especially because you just want to see players' true traits shine. And when you've been watching and scouting these kids for such a long time, it really comes down to the fact of the matter being, well, how is my team going to improve? Should I go out and get this guy? And at the end of the day, when I talk about these guys who have so much room for improvement, but still have ways that they could and should affect their teams positively, I think that in fantasy especially, you're going to want to look out for this class. And I know it's going to be very difficult to really diagnose them from an early stage. But give them time to marinate in this league, and perhaps you will be slightly surprised, like pleasantly surprised by what they offer. That should just about do it for this segment. Coming up to end today's show, we finish with an IDP player profile of a player who had an injury-filled season last year, but I still believe is going to add a lot of value to one of the best defenses in the league. We'll be right back to talk about him after the break.